The movie begins in a futuristic setting where privacy is a distant memory, replaced by an all-encompassing surveillance system. We are transported to a cold and regulated metropolis. As the camera moves through this city, it follows the trajectory of a man through the streets, where every corner and every face are covered by layers of virtual data. Everything around is monitored and analyzed in real time through augmented reality. This man is Sal Fryland, a detective who walks while observing passers-by, with details and histories of their lives displayed directly before his eyes, thanks to a vast network known as the ether, which records every sight, sound, and action of people. The plot thickens when Sal finds himself in an interrogation room with a father anguished by the disappearance of his son. Upon consulting the ether's records, Sal discovers that the young man jumped from a building, taking his own life. Shortly after, the narrative follows Sal being approached by a woman desperate to find her stolen jewelry. She asks Sal to check the records of her maid and 2 other people connected to a recent murder. As Sal navigates these routine demands, he stumbles upon a murder case that catches his attention due to a notable flaw. The victim's data is inaccessible. At the crime scene, Sal meets Charlie, a colleague who introduces him to James Cray, the victim, murdered just over an hour ago. The most disturbing aspect is that Cray's digital record has been blocked, obstructing access to the usual viewpoint recordings of the victim. Upon reviewing the available information, Sal has a surprising revelation. He is not seeing the murder through the victim's eyes, but rather through the eyes of the killer. The conclusion is that the criminal managed to hack into Cray's mental vision, allowing him to usurp the victim's eyes, and then switch the perspective to his own, erasing any digital trace of his presence. Charlie confirms Sal's hypothesis that the killer manipulated the ether to alter the death record, making it appear as if Cray was alone at the time of his death. This sophisticated hack is a dangerous precedent, as it leaves no metadata, digital signatures, or ways to track the criminal. Charlie also mentions that a similar case occurred in Baltimore, where the victim's perspective was manipulated in the same way, and all traces of the last visitor were erased. Sal recalls that earlier that day, he saw a woman who also had no digital record. The next morning, Sal, with the help of Lester, a master of information technology, dives deep into the crime investigation. They discover that the victim was visited by a stranger shortly before being killed, but no physical evidence of this interaction was found. Lester reveals that after examining the victim's digital records, they detected subtle alterations in images that served to camouflage illicit transactions. The manipulations were so meticulous that they went unnoticed by the police, allowing the victim to avoid charges of insider trading. During the analysis, they also find evidence of an enigmatic visitor whose existence seems to have been erased from all records. These discoveries remind Sal of a mysterious woman he had encountered the previous evening. Her description matches exactly with that of the last person seen with another victim. Alarmed, he begins to suspect that his own memories may have been altered by someone. Upon finishing the data analysis, Sal, overcome by a feeling of nostalgia, watches an old video of his son. Feeling emotional, he tries to contact Kristen, his ex-wife, to remind her that their son's birthday is the next day. However, Kristen, who is now married to someone else, asks Sal to stop reliving their son's memories since he passed away some time ago. The discussion escalates when Kristen's current husband, annoyed by Sal's persistent calls, intervenes, suggesting that Sal might be drunk and demanding that he show a record of his calls from the past 10 years. Disgusted and hurt by the turn of the conversation, Sal hangs up. Shortly after this painful interaction, Sal is called to investigate another murder. This time, 2 young women have been killed, and their visual memories were erased, leaving no trace of the culprit. Upon arriving at the crime scene, a police officer informs him that the killer left an undetectable digital trail, making tracking nearly impossible. He mentions that he was the first to respond to the call because he was nearby, but the rest of the team was still on the way. The only witness, the maid who was downstairs at the time of the crimes, is visibly shaken and briefly describes a visitor with long brown hair. Upon reviewing the maid's recording, Sal realizes with horror that the killer might still be inside the residence. He begins a frantic search for the criminal, but is caught off guard by Anon, who kills one of the guards. In a desperate chase that leads them to a train station, Sal almost catches the killer, but his vision suddenly fails, leaving him disoriented and vulnerable. In the whirlwind of events, Sal finds himself in extreme danger as he is struck by a train, falling unconscious beside the tracks. However, as the investigation progresses, the detectives discover that the criminal behind the acts insists on being paid exclusively in cash, a form of payment invulnerable to hacks, requiring personal meetings with her clients. Amidst this revelation, Sal realizes that his experience with the train was an illusion, a manipulated vision that made him believe in a non-existent accident. Determined to capture the criminal, the detectives devise a plan to hire her, using Sal as bait in an elaborate disguise. Sal creates a new persona, that of a stockbroker involved with an escort, fearful that his fiancée might find out about the affair. He contacts the woman, known only as Anon, and requests a meeting to eliminate any trace of his indiscretion. They arrange to meet on a rooftop, from where they proceed to Sal's apartment to begin the deletion process. Lester, another detective, is in charge of surveillance, monitoring every move Anon makes from another room. While Anon works on deleting the memory requested by Sal, he insists that no trace of the escort be left behind. Anon completes the task skillfully, adjusting the timeline to fill in the gaps left by the deletion. During the process, Anon reveals her true motivation. She yearns for complete invisibility, desires to leave no trace of her existence, which explains her aversion to pseudonyms and her meticulous concealment of personal information. After finishing the job, Anon takes the payment and swiftly disappears into the shadows of the city. Sal tries to follow her, but she vanishes before he can catch up. Moving cautiously through the corridor with his gun in hand, he realizes that she has disappeared without a trace. The next day, Sal and Charlie meet with the team and a new tech expert, Cyrus Fryer, who manages to hack into Anon's vision, allowing the team to monitor her actions in real time through her eyes. Lester clarifies that to locate Anon, she needs to be active on the ether. Eventually, she connects to the network and begins reviewing a memory involving Jesper Nix, a renowned art dealer. The memory shows Jesper negotiating with Max Keener, a known forger. Anon then manipulates the memory, erasing Jesper's meeting with Max and replacing it with images of Jesper pretending to discover a valuable painting. Later, Jesper attempts to sell the forgery as a legitimate work, aiming to profit from the deception. While the detectives focused their efforts on tracking Anon's digital trail, they managed to trace the route through a dozen proxies. However, the last proxy proved unreachable, hiding Anon in the shadows of the network. For an entire day, the detectives engaged in digital surveillance of Anon, but her ability to remain undetectable left them on the brink of exhaustion. In a fleeting moment, she approaches a window, and they almost manage to pinpoint her location, but then the connection is cut off. Confused, Sal inquires about her whereabouts, and Cyrus reveals that they lost her. She managed to dismantle the chain of proxies they were using to follow her. He suggests initiating a new search, a known evasive maneuver, though there's a risk she might already be aware that they are on her trail. Shortly afterward, they receive news that Jesper has been murdered, replicating the modus operandi observed in previous victims. Jesper, the commissioner's coldness in dismissing the seriousness of the murders, suggesting that the victims somehow brought about their own demise, contrasts with the gravity with which Sal views the case. He realizes they are dealing with a much more serious threat than they had imagined. With the investigation seemingly stalled, Charlie proposes that Sal infiltrate the underworld again to gather more information about Anon. This time, Sal disguises himself as a drug buyer, aiming to get close to her once more. During a meeting at Sal's apartment, Anon continues her task of erasing unwanted memories to replace them according to Sal's instructions. As time passes, they develop a personal connection, and Anon begins to share her dilemmas, strengthening the bond between them. However, the situation changes when Sal starts using drugs, raising suspicions in Anon. She confronts him with a gun, questioning the existence of a supposed girlfriend, as his behavior suggests he is single. With skill, Sal manages to divert her suspicions, convincing her to lower the gun, and in a moment of tension, they kiss, culminating in a night of intimacy. Afterward, Anon goes to the bathroom, where she discovers Sal's true identity as a detective. Feeling betrayed, she hastily leaves the apartment. Moments later, Sal hears a gunshot and, upon investigating, finds Lester dead, presumably at Anon's hands. Shortly after, Anon contacts Sal again, issuing a dark threat. She warns that if he persists in pursuing her, he will meet the same fatal end. She challenges him, pointing out that he has a significant problem looking into the past because doing so could expose his true identity. The warning is serious. If Sal continues down this path, it could lead to his downfall. Later, Charlie confronts Sal, showing frustration and disappointment. He scolds Sal for allowing Anon to escape, and worse, for letting Lester be killed during the chaos. Charlie questions Sal's ability to recover from this blow, emphasizing that Anon managed to penetrate his defenses, access his files, and uncover his weaknesses. From there, Anon begins to torment Sal relentlessly, bringing his most distressing memories to the surface. She forces him to relive traumatic episodes from his life, such as when he was assaulted, chased by a dog, or trapped in a rat-infested room. The psychological blows intensify with the revelation that Sal's son died in a tragic car accident, an event that deeply scarred him. The next day, Sal discovers to his dismay that Anon has deleted all the happy memories he had of his family. In a state of panic, he tries to access those memories but finds they have vanished. With no other options, he seeks help from his ex-wife, Kristen, pleading with her to share any memories she has of their son. However, Kristen reveals that her memories were also erased, leaving them both in desolation. In this moment of despair, Sal realizes that his apartment is on fire. In a reflexive act of self-defense, he draws his gun and starts shooting randomly, trying to protect himself from what he believes is a real threat. Quickly, he realizes that it was all just an illusion, another of Anon's mind games. The vision dissipates, and Sal nearly makes the irreversible mistake of shooting a neighbor. Shaken by how close he came to causing a tragedy, he hears the sound of the elevator, rushes to check, but finds no one, intensifying his feelings of paranoia and fear. While driving, his vision is again manipulated by Anon, making him believe the road is empty. He continues driving, unaware of the real traffic, until the illusion abruptly fades, revealing that he is surrounded by cars, leading him to crash into several of them. Shortly after, he meets with Charlie, who advises him to take a break and step away from the case. Sal, however, is convinced that Anon will not leave him in peace. He admits that she continues to manipulate his vision, causing him to doubt reality. Sal confesses that he lives in terror, unable to sleep, as she knows every detail about him and has erased all precious memories of his son Salvador. He recounts how he was manipulated into reliving the most traumatic moments of his life, a torment that Anon repeatedly imposed, pushing him to the brink of his sanity. Charlie, understanding the seriousness of the case, mentions that they are recruiting more hackers of Anon's caliber, highlighting that no one is safe and that everything is interconnected and exposed. When Sal asks how to stop this growing threat, Charlie responds with a note of regret that the only solution is to capture Anon. The conversation is interrupted by an officer who brings alarming news. Sal allegedly shot a neighbor. The recordings incriminate him, showing him pulling the trigger, but he swears the footage was manipulated and that Anon is behind the setup. Disbelieved by his colleagues, Sal faces resistance to his version of events. Charlie then decides to remove him from the investigation, confining him to his home under constant surveillance. With no options, Sal reluctantly accepts the situation, aware that every move he makes is being monitored. That same night, pretending to sleep, Sal escapes from his apartment, neutralizing the officer assigned to watch over him. He heads to Anon's apartment, where she awaits him, gun in hand. Anon reveals to him that she too was wrongfully accused of the murders of her clients and shows Sal her memory of the moment of Lester's death, proving her innocence. Quickly, she disappears into the night. Shortly after, Charlie confronts Sal, furious about his insubordination and for assaulting an officer. Sal tries to justify his actions, convinced of Anon's innocence, but Charlie rejects his explanations, questioning the integrity of his judgment. Charlie officially suspends Sal, revokes his access, and intensifies his surveillance, warning him that he'll be under close watch. The next day, a text message from Anon suggests a meeting. She arrives at Sal's apartment, managing to distract the officers watching him. However, the real killer, who had been following her, sneaks into the apartment with lethal intentions against Sal. At the peak of the conflict, Sal is shot in the abdomen. It's at this critical moment that the true identity of the killer is revealed. Cyrus, the newly arrived IT specialist on the detective team, who had been obsessed with Anon for years and murdered everyone who had gotten intimately involved with her. Knowing that Cyrus can see through his eyes in real time, Sal manages, with precise aim, to shoot back, gravely wounding Cyrus. In the ensuing chaos, Cyrus tries to escape with Anon, but in a desperate move, fires blindly, and this time, the shot is fatal for Cyrus. After the dust settles, Anon slips away, leaving Sal alone to deal with the aftermath. Later in a tense discussion, Charlie, Sal, and Joseph debate the recent events. Joseph confronts Charlie, questioning how it was possible for Cyrus, whose records were completely erased, to have worked so closely with them. Charlie admits that it was Joseph who had unwittingly recommended Cyrus, but Joseph realizes it was a ploy by Cyrus to infiltrate the team. Turning to Sal, Joseph demands to know Anon's whereabouts and details about who she really is. Sal, keeping his usual silence, offers no answers and walks away, carrying the secrets with him. In the film's conclusion, Sal, in a moment of introspection, manages to restore the precious memories that had been erased and meets Anon one last time. During this final encounter, Anon reveals the complexity of her existence. She fragments her life, dispersing small moments and hiding them within other people's records, making herself almost undetectable. When Sal questions her about the reasons for hiding to such an extent, Anon confesses that it's not because she has something to hide, but simply because she chooses not to share her life with anyone else. This final revelation underscores Anon's enigmatic nature and concludes the film with a reflection on privacy and identity in the modern world.